Hello, students, and welcome to today's session on phonetics and phonology with Carol. In today's class, we'll be talking about speech sounds and sound segments in English. Speech sounds and sound segments in English. We're all familiar with the word sounds, and we know we produce so many sounds as humans. When we cough, when we laugh, when we sneeze, produce sounds. But these are not the sounds we're talking about today. We're talking about those sounds that are linguistically relevant, those sounds that constitute linguistic symbols, those sounds that you intentionally produce with a speech apparatus and that are perceived by the listener's ears and interpreted by their brains, those sounds that you can transcribe when you hear another produce them. Those are the sounds we call speech sounds. And of course, we are looking at the sounds today in relation to the English language. So we're talking about the sound segments in English language. As usual, we'll look at our outline. We'll talk about an introduction to speech sounds. We'll discuss the anatomy of speech production. Of course, this has been dealt with in an earlier video on the mechanics of speech production. So, for a detailed treatment of that part, you would have to visit that video on the mechanics of speech production. Then quickly we go to the English consonants, English vowels, and finally to phonemes, allophones, and connected speech. We start with speech sounds. What are speech sounds? Speech sounds, or speech segments, if you like, are discrete units that occur in a sequence of sounds in spoken language. They are those sounds that are put together to form words, the words that you communicate with, the words that are also combined to form sentences, the words that constitute the utterances with which you communicate. When you break them down, these utterances, these words, into the constituent sounds, into the individual sounds that make them up, you are looking at speech sounds. So these sounds can be broken down into phonemes, into syllables, depending on what you want to do. And that process is called speech segmentation. By way of definition, called the process of breaking down the individual phonetic sounds we hear into discrete segments. I'll give you an example with the three words here on our screen. We have pots, sport, and tops. Sports, sport, and tops. If you look at these three words, you will find out that they contain exactly the same four sounds. But the difference is the order of their arrangement. So you can identify s, p, t, and o as speech sounds in these words. So individual speech sounds can be combined to form different words. Their arrangement, the order of their combination is what makes the differences we have in the meaning of our words. So quickly we look at the anatomy of speech production, and as I said earlier, this has been dealt with under the mechanics of speech production. When we talk about anatomy in phonetics or phonology, we're simply trying to link the speech production process to the body parts that are actually responsible for producing the speech. So we're talking about the physiological mechanism behind the speech production process. If you can watch me speak, you will see at least that my lips are moving. You can see that my tongue is moving. You can see that at some point you see my teeth. This means that These organs are what I am using. And what am I doing? I'm using them to modify or shape the airstream that is coming from inside my body to produce sound. And for this reason, whenever we talk about the anatomy of speech production, we start with the airstream mechanism. The airstream mechanism, because without airstream, without air, you cannot produce speech. The airstream mechanism refers to the source of air. Here, of course, it is linked to the respiratory system. You know that the speech production process is usually a secondary process attached to other body systems. The respiratory system provides air for your sustenance. The air you breathe in and out, which sustains your life, is what the respiratory system is interested in. It is this same air that speech production uses. So the respiratory system acts as the power source which provides the energy that drives speech production. I am particularly here focusing on the pulmonic airstream, which is the airstream from the lungs, because that's the primary airstream for speech production. But of course, we have other sources. We have the glottalic airstream, we have the velaric airstream, each of which is named in line with the particular organ, particular area where they are generated. After the airstream mechanism, we talk about phonation. Phonation being related to the laryngeal system. The larynx, also called the voice box, contains the vocal folds and the glottis. In this particular area is where the voicing of a speech sound is determined. Glottal opening results in voicelessness, while glottal closure results in voicing. The third stage is the oronasal process. Oronasal is a blend of oral and nasal, and that is the process where the nature of the sound is determined, whether it's going to be an oral sound, whereby air is expelled through the mouth, through the oral cavity, or a nasal sound, whereby air is expelled through the nasal cavity. And of course, as we explained in the mechanics of speech production, it is the velum, the position of the velum, that determines whether the sound is oral or nasal. And then finally, we look at the articulatory system, which coordinates articulation. At the stage of articulation, we have our articulators, passive and active, coming together to shape the airflow to produce different speech sounds. So quickly, we talk about our consonants in English. Consonants generally are sounds that are produced with some form of obstruction to airflow and, in most cases, contact of articulators. And they are classified using three main parameters: the place of articulation, the manner of articulation, and voicing. First, we look at the place of articulation. The place of articulation refers to that place, that part in the vocal tract where the sound is produced, that point of maximum constriction, because each sound is produced at a point where the articulators meet. So wherever the articulators meet at the point of producing a particular sound becomes its place of articulation. You can see the bilabial sounds here, b, the labiodental, v, the dental, th, the alveolar, t, d, the palatal alveolar, sh, j, the velar, k, g, the glottal. So it's a very easy thing to tell where any sound, any consonant is produced by just producing that sound and paying attention to what you do, you will know what organs are involved. And the beautiful thing about these sounds is that they are named in line with the organ that produces them. Look at bilabial sounds, for instance. Bi means two, labial lips, two lips. So you can easily tell what sounds are produced with two lips by bringing your two lips together and blowing air through them. Very easy to tell. You can try it. Next, we look at the manner of articulation parameter, and that manner simply talks about how the airflow is modified. And we have basically six subclasses of sounds based on this parameter. We have the stops. The stops are produced first with complete closure when the articulators come close together. Wrists, they come close together, preventing air from either going in or coming out. And then air builds up behind the closure, and finally you have the articulators suddenly parting ways to release this airflow. If you pay attention to the sounds listed here, p, b, t, g, you'll find out that each of them has these three stages: the stage of complete closure, the stage of compression, and the stage of sudden release. These are the three phases that characterize the stops or plosives. For the fricatives, there's still a closure, but this time around it is partial. What happens is simply that the organs come together, but not so close as to totally block off air. So what you have is a narrow passage for air to flow out through. And because of the narrowness of that passage, there is friction as air is blown out, as air passes through. So you have such sounds as v, v, s. I want to believe that it's because of the friction that characterizes the air passage that this class of sounds are called fricatives. And then we have the third class, which combines the first two classes, the class of affricates. They combine the total closure of stops with the gradual release of fricatives. So when you articulate an affricate, first you see that stage of total closure where the articulators come together, and then rather than having a sudden release, which is characteristic of plosives, you have this air gradually released. And this is even reflected in the symbols that are used to represent affricates. I'm talking about the two sounds ch and ch. The third class is the class of nasals, where we have airflow through the nasal cavity. And I have already explained that this is a function of the velum. At the point of producing nasals, the velum is lowered so that air can flow through the nasal cavity. And we have just three sounds in that category. We have and Next, we have the class of approximants. Approximants are produced with a slight narrowing in the sense that there is actually no contact between the articulators that are used to produce approximants. And apparently that's why they are called approximant, because what they approximate the particular place of articulation of the sounds. For instance, we have w, w. It's an approximant, a bilabial approximant, but unlike all the other bilabial sounds, you see that the lips do not meet because it approximates the bilabial place of articulation. W. Same thing for the palatal approximant. Yeah, you see the tongue raised close to the roof of the mouth, but they do not meet. Same for the sound r, r. The tongue is in the post-alveolar region, but it does not really touch the roof of the mouth. So approximants basically are produced without any contact. And finally, we look at the class of the lateral, which is just one in that category. The lateral is characterized by air flow from the sides of the tongue. The only lateral in English is L. And what happens is that the tongue assumes a convex position in the articulation of this sound, L. And because of that position, air flows from the side. And this gives us the 24 consonants of English, the 24 phonemic consonants of English. Quickly, we look at voicing, which is a function of the laryngeal system. We have said that when the vocal folds vibrate, we produce voice sounds. And what causes the vibration? When the glottis is closed and the airstream from the lungs has to force its way through that closure, the vocal folds vibrate as a result of the pressure from that airstream. And of course, we teach students the elementary, the manual, the very simple way of testing when a sound is voiced or voiceless is by producing it by placing your finger here on the Adam's apple and producing that sound. For all the sounds I have here, b, v, the, z, you will feel that vibration here in the larynx. Then, of course, the voiceless sounds do not involve any form of vibration because we said the glottis is open, so air simply flows freely. And such examples are st. If you apply the test we just did, you'll see that there won't be any vibration at all. And that is the third of the parameters for describing the 24 consonants of English. By combining these parameters, you can actually specifically describe any consonant. I can describe the as a voiceless bilabial plosive. Voiceless, looking at the parameter of voicing, bilabial, describing its place, and plosive, describing its manner. So you can also go ahead and describe all the consonants of English using the three parameters. And this chart summarizes everything I have said so far. You find the columns in which we have placed the places of articulation, and then the rows represent the manners of articulation. So for each cell, any sound in that cell can be described using a combination of the description on the column and row. For instance, you can find at the intersection of bilabial and nasals, which makes it a bilabial nasal. And where you find two sounds in a cell, it simply means that the first one is voiceless and the second one is voiced. You might also have noticed that there are some cells that do not contain any sound here. It simply means that there is no English consonant in that category. For instance, there is no dental stop, there is no labiodental affricate, there is no dental nasal, and so on. I want to believe that with the explanations and with the charts, you can now describe and produce your English consonants without any stress. So quickly we move to English vowels. And vowels here are described as speech sounds that are produced with an open vocal tract. What that means is that there is no obstruction to the airflow through the mouth. There is no significant constriction that could cause audible friction. So when you say ah, a, e, o, you're simply looking at changing the size and of your oral cavity. You're simply looking at changing the shape of your tongue at each point. This interaction, the size of your mouth oral cavity and the shape of your tongue are basically what you need to produce sounds, to produce vowel sounds, not necessarily any contact between articulators. And of course, all vowels in English are voiced. This is very important. So when you describe vowels, there is no distinction between voiced and voiceless vowels because there are no voiceless vowels in English. Quickly look, we look at the classification, the vowel classification parameters side by side with the vowel chart. And we have three parameters here. We have the tongue height parameter, which looks at the, the vertical distance between the tongue and the roof of the mouth in the course of producing each of these sounds. And because we have some vowels that are produced with the tongue raised close to the roof of the mouth, we have the category we call the high vowels. We also have the ones that are produced when the tongue seems to be at rest. We have the low vowels. And for those produced midway between these two, we have the mid vowels. If you look at the vowel chart we have, you will see that we have three strata, the uppermost stratum, the lowest, and then the one in the middle. And these are what describe our high vowels, low vowels, and mid vowels. For instance, when I produce E, and when I say ah, you'll see that my tongue is almost at rest when I say ah, compared to when I say it's midway between the two. The second parameter is the tongue position or tongue advancement, which pays attention this time around not to the height of the tongue, but to the part of the tongue that is raised at the point of producing a vowel. So when it is the front of the tongue that you use, it is a front vowel. All the examples I gave under tongue height are actually front vowels. You can see my tongue when I produce them. E, you can see my tongue. But pay attention to these ones. O, U, you'll see that my tongue is retracted. It is actually the back of the tongue that is raised. And so those are called back vowels. In between, again, you see the ones where it is the center of the tongue that is raised, and those are called central vowels. When I pronounce a sound like my tongue is neither out or in. So it is the center. That gives us the three vowel categories based on the tongue advancement: front vowels, central vowels, and back vowels. And then we talk about lip rounding. You must have noticed that some vowel sounds are produced with the lips forming an O shape. Ooh, or those sounds are called rounded vowels, and some are produced either with spread lips or with neutral lips, as in those are called unrounded vowels. There is a fourth parameter which is based on the degree of muscular effort. The degree of muscular effort. Some vowels are produced with some form of tenseness at the root of the mouth, of the tongue, while some are produced with laxity at the root of the tongue. Compare the first two sounds on the chart in the high front vowel region. The first is in the word seat, e, e, e. Produced properly, you will feel the tenseness at the roof of your mouth. Now look at the second one in the word sit, sit, sit. really lax. So that parameter gives us a distinction between tense vowels and lax vowels. And if you look at the examples we have here, we have used the quantitative transcription convention, which we have already described in another video, to distinguish the tense vowels from the lax vowels. Tense vowels having a column which serves as a length marker. You can see 5 of them, 2 in the high vowel region, 2 in the mid vowel region, and just 1 of them in the low vowel region. Then we have 7 lax vowels. The vowels we've treated so far are what we call monophthongs, the pure vowels. Of course, vowel classification can still be looked at based on the relative stability in phonetic space. The relative stability in phonetic space. Some vowels are produced with a stable tongue position throughout their articulation, and they are called pure vowels. So because the tongue remains in one position, they are called monophthongs or pure vowels. We have some examples here as in see, sit, bed, cat, car, hot, law, put, food, cup, bird, about. In about is the first vowel in the first syllable that is monophthong. Now, the second category based on this same parameter is what we call the diphthongs. They are gliding vowels. We say gliding because in the course of producing the vowels, the tongue moves from one position to another. So they are said to be complex vowels. The tongue glides during articulation when you produce diphthongs. So the stability in phonetic space that we witness in monophthongs does not exist in diphthongs. The only thing is that the glide is so swift that the diphthong is still produced within one syllable. And we have examples as in face, a, face, I in my, oi in boy, ow in noun, o in go, ear as in near, air as in hair, and as in here. So that gives us the two types of vowels based on stability. So much for consonants and vowels. Let's quickly look at phonemes. In another video, we have also already described phonemes. And here we'll simply say that they are abstract sounds. In fact, all the sounds we've treated today are consonants and vowels, represent phonemes. Every language has its own set of phonemes. But the interesting thing about these phonemes is that they are abstract sounds. In reality, when you produce them, each phoneme can be realized in different ways. So in looking at phonemes, allophones, and connectors, we are simply looking at proceeding or from abstract sound units to natural speech patterns. When we described the voiceless bilabial plosive, it is a phoneme. But in actual production, you actually either realize it as the aspirated variant, the unreleased variant, or the unaspirated variant. So what you produce are not phonemes, but actual phones. In this section, we're going to contrast phonemes with allophones. Phonemes, as I said, are abstract. They are abstract mental sounds, sound units that distinguish meaning. And of course, they are the basic building blocks of our language's sound system, because when you describe the sounds of a language, what you describe are the phonemes of that language. The actual realizations are in different level of description. So they are mental constructs. Phonemes exist in the mouth, in the mind, sorry. They exist in the mind. They are not in physical speech. They are also language specific because each language has its own phoneme inventory. If you are lucky to be able to speak more than one language, you will notice that there are sounds in one language that are not in the other. And that's because phonemes are language specific. And another very important dimension to phonemes is that they are contrastive. What makes them contrastive is that they can actually change word meaning. Pick a phoneme, pick a word that contains that phoneme, replace it with another sound, another phoneme in the language, and you have a different meaning. I can say sit, for instance, sit, sit, and I replace t with I have sip. Sit is different from sip. And the difference we have in meaning is simply because both s, t, and p are phonemes of English. So phonemes are contrastive in addition to being distinctive and significant. So what about allophones? We say that allophones are the actual physical realizations of phonemes in speech. They are predictable variants of a phoneme that occur in specific contexts. I have given the example of the bilabial plosive. Let's talk about the lateral. The lateral, we know, can be a clear sound when you have it at the beginning of a word. For instance, when I say love, 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 you see how clear it is. It can be dark when it occurs before another consonant, in which case that clarity doesn't show. I can produce it in salt, salt, salt. If you don't listen clearly, you will not hear that there is a lateral there. And that's simply because it is the dark variant, the dark allophone that is there. It can also be syllabic, as in the last syllable of bottle, bottle, bottle. We still have the lateral there, but this time around it is syllabic. So what you actually produce are the allophones, not the phonemes. And each phonemes is capable of being realized in different ways, which points to why we say phonemes are abstract, while allophones are physical. So allophones are physical realizations. They are what you produce, and they are what the hearer actually hears. When you do phonetic transcription, what you use are the allophones, using diacritics to capture the exact quality of the sounds. And of course, you enclose them in square brackets. We already described this when we try to differentiate between phonemes and when we try to differentiate between phonetics and phonology in one of our videos. And allophones are non-contrastive. What that simply means is that they can't change meaning. If in place of a clear p that I should have used in sport, for instance, if I have a way of using the aspirated p in sport, it wouldn't change meaning. It will still be the same thing because allophones are non-contrastive. They are also context dependent. They are context dependent because their occurrence is governed by phonological rules. I've mentioned the aspirated pa, which occurs word initially. So certainly we know that whenever we have that sound occurring at the beginning of a word, particularly before a stressed vowel, it will be aspirated because it is context dependent. And when we have that phoneme occurring before another consonant, certainly it will be unreleased. because the release will be blocked by the succeeding phoneme. So, having dealt with our phonemes and allophones, let's quickly talk about the connected speech. Connected speech. Of course, we don't communicate in sounds, individual sounds. We don't communicate in phonemes. When we communicate, we'll put phonemes together to form words. And that brings us to connected speech processes. A number of things happen when we do this. The first one we'll talk about here is assimilation. And in assimilation, a sound becomes more like a neighboring sound. A sound copies certain features of the sound in its environment. We'll just use the very simple example of pluralization, the plural morpheme, when it's articulated. In most English words, to pluralize them, we add S. But how we realize this S will depend on the, the particular segment at the end of that noun. For instance, in the example we have here, I have Doug, which ends with G, a voiced sound. At the addition of S, you don't expect me to say dogs. No. By virtue of the voiced nature of that last segment, the S that I am adding will be realized as Z, which is also voiced. So you have dogs. Compare this with when I have cats. Of course, I'll realize cats. So that is a case of voicing assimilation. As we will see in another video on phonological processes, assimilation can be of place, of manner, and of voicing. Next, we talk about elision. Elision simply refers to the deletion or omission of a sound that will be present in careful speech. Most times in connected speech, we don't produce everything. There are some sounds that we intentionally or unintentionally omit. I may want to say, for instance, next week, and I hear myself say next week. Next week, I have omitted k there. In the example we have here, say stand by. Usually, people don't spend time trying to ensure that that last segment in stand is produced. Nobody forces himself to say stand by. No. When you say stand by, you have unintentionally, unconsciously deleted the da. And that is a connected speech process which cuts across both native and non native English accents. The next one we'll talk about is linking and intrusion. These are two different processes. In linking, you have a particular segment which is not produced when a sound is produced in isolation. For instance, the example we have here, far. When I say far, I don't say far, at least in non-rhotic accents of English. But the moment I add a way, for the fact that the initial segment of a way is a vowel, that final segment that was supposed to be in far that was not pronounced resurfaces and it now becomes a source of linking for the two words. So while I'll say far, I will say far away. That is linking. Compare it to the intrusion process where a non existent sound surfaces to link or connect sounds together. So, for instance, I have law, then I have order. But when I combine it, I'll say law and order, law and order. So both linking and intrusion are processes that connect words in fluent speech. And the purpose is to do what? To maintain rhythm and flow. Finally, we talk about co-articulation, and these are articulatory gestures for different segments. When you produce sounds individually, every sound has a definite quality. Okay, but when you now produce sounds as a string, In connected speech, you see that the articulators move consciously from one sound to the next, and at some point, they cause each sound to be influenced by its neighbors. For instance, if I want to produce, if you watch my lips, they are not rounded. But if I want to produce port, 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 unconsciously, because of the rounded nature of or that succeeds p, even at the point of saying p, I already have rounded lips. So I say port. This is just a tip of the iceberg because in our video on phonological processes, these are treated in greater details. So as usual, we're going to have a recap of what we've done today. We started by treating speech sounds as discrete segments, and we concluded that speech sounds are segments that can be analyzed and classified. We have made a distinction between their physical and mental qualities, which is what characterizes the difference between phonetics and phonology. And we said that this is fundamental to understanding how speech works. Next, we look at the 24 consonants of English and their parameter. We classify them based on the place, the manner, and voicing. We looked at the vowel classification framework too, and we explained that the English vowels are 20, 12 monophthongs, and 8 diphthongs. And we classify the monophthongs by their tongue height, by their tongue position, and by their lip rounding. We showed you vowel charts that visually represented these vowel qualities. And finally, we talked about the phonemes as being abstract and the allophones as being physical. And we try to introduce you to connected speech processes, assimilation, elision, and co-articulation, and of course linking. And we say that these are the processes that make natural conversation fluent and efficient. Thank you for joining us once again, and we hope to see you in more of our videos. Thank you for your likes. Thank you for your shares. Thank you for the subscription. Join us again on our next edition of Phonetics and Phonology with Carol. Thank you.